Everything you have been told about the Warhammer 40k universe is a lie. Forget about what you think you know. Leave your preconceptions at the door. This is a completely serious, in no way satirical, 100% canon series exposing the truths that James Workshire doesn't want you to know. Only I, the Vox of Scoff, know the truth. Or I'm making up complete nonsense for cheap giggles. You'll never know. Now, steal Chapter Master Valrak's tinfoil hat, because it's time to expose some lies. And we start with the Space Wolves. You know them, or you think you do. What if I told you that everything you know about the Space Wolves is a lie, a carefully constructed smokescreen? You see, I know the truth. The Space Wolves don't exist. The Space Wolves never did exist. The Space Wolves never will exist. They are nothing more than a joint venture between two of the most powerful factions in the 40k universe, the Imperium of Man and the Fenrician Tourist Board. No, I'm not pulling a fast one and claiming that the Vika Fenrica are really the Space Wolves, or that the Rout is. None of them were real either. And I have proof. You will, by now, know the saying, there are no wolves on Fenris. This saying wasn't created by accident. It was hiding the truth in plain sight. Magnus saw a glimpse of the truth when he said it, but, as is always the case with Magnus, he failed to follow it through. He really did many things wrong. Let's take a proper look at what Magnus said in Prospero Burns so you can see the first piece of the puzzle. Imagine the time when mankind first discovered Fenris, continued Magnus. A world so utterly inimical to life that humans simply could not survive. Everything about Fenris was death. From the blood-freezing cold, to the sinking lands, to the howling winds that suck the life from your lungs. Back then, of course, geneticists saw impossibility as a challenge, and daily wrought new codes within the chromosomes of human and animal genomes, as easily as a Mechanicum punched data wafers for servitors. So we can see that Magnus is saying that these could be human-wolf hybrids. But he goes further. I can look past the flesh and muscle of that beast, paring back the bone into the heart of its marrow, to read every scar and twist in its genetic code. I can unravel the millennia of change back to the logos of its origins, said Magnus. Araman was surprised to hear the sadness in his voice, as though he had seen things he would rather not have seen. The thing it is, what it wished to be, and all the stages of that long evolutionary road. So, this isn't just guesswork. Magnus can see that these are man-made hybrids, from before the Age of Strife. Now we must, as humans always do, turn to the Emperor for guidance. Specifically, this quote from Wolfsbane. Their highest art is the forging of steel, admitted the Emperor. Their world has regressed to a pre-technological state, and if you saw it, you would not be surprised why. It is a beautiful, savage place of ice, fire, and monsters. A charming experiment in reconstructed mythologies. What do you mean? Fenris is a relic from the days before Old Night. Now we're getting somewhere. Fenris isn't like this by accident. It was made to be like this. It was, as he says, a charming experiment in reconstructed mythologies. They made a planet specifically to reconstruct the Old Norse way of life, as well as its myths. What does that sound like to you? To me, that sounds like a theme park. It's Jurassic Park, but on a planetary scale, and with Norse life as their selling point, and clever wolves of ancient myth as their dinosaurs. They, essentially, are giving people the Viking experience. Fenris wasn't chosen by accident. A land of ice and fire is the exact description of Iceland, the last home of true Vikings, before they turned to Christianity. The place where Vikings escaped kings and religious persecution. Fenris was the building block to make a true Viking experience, and was tailor-made from there. But how, then, do we get from here to the Space Wolves are not real? Think about the expense required to turn a whole planet into a theme park. Reconstructed monsters and all. That required a powerful and rich entity to do. An entity like the Fenrician Tourist Board. Sure, it probably had a different name before the Great Crusade, but its power was still that of a human civilization that was able to pull this off. When the Crusade reaches Fenris, the Board would see that, powerful as they are, they had no answer to the Space Marines. just as much of humanity had lost their technologies, they no longer had the gene editing abilities required to make their own. But what they did have was millennia of experience in public relations. They quickly joined the Imperium and invented a legion that didn't, in reality, exist. How can I say this with confidence? Think, for a moment, about the Space Wolves. What do we know of them? They're called the Space Wolves. They're ruled over by the Grand Wolf, and their companies are ruled by Wolf Lords. Their elites are called the Wolf Guard. They ride Thunderwolves and split into wolf packs. They grow fangs like wolves and are hairy like wolves. No naturally growing legion has that sort of brand alignment. No self-respecting legion would allow themselves to be that two-dimensional. But a firm pictured a Viking experience who was making things up by committee? This is exactly the sort of thing that a committee wanting tourism would think is a good idea. Now, think of the Imperium. What would they get out of this arrangement? The Imperium has lost 2 legions, 2 Primarchs. It needs to be able to explain away those losses. What, then, if they had a legion called the Emperor's Executioners? Well, then it would be able to say that these legions failed somehow. They don't need to be specific. Now they have a legion called the Emperor's Executioners. Even if it doesn't actually exist, they can hint at why they got that name without ever having to spell it out. They could say that the wolves were held back at the start, created separate from the rest of the legions. And that is what they say, that the Trefoil legions of the Space Wolves, Salamanders and Alpha Legion were treated this way. But it is a lie. A carefully worded deceit, because with this so-called legion, they had a threat. Something to keep the Primarchs in line with. Do you really think that such a deceit is beyond Malkador? Or that planting the memory of a being called Leman Russ in the minds of the Primarchs to keep them in line is somehow beneath him? No, it's not. In fact, it's exactly in line with his character. It's what he did. But then, what about now, in whatever millennia passes for the present setting of 40k? You can go to Fenris, you can see Space Wolves. They turn up all over the place. Can you? Do they? You go to Fenris and you find hard-drinking Space Marines. But Space Marines can't get drunk. Yet we're expected to believe that a bunch of barbarians have succeeded in this, where greater minds have failed. Come now, you have better critical thinking than that. Or a chapter master that is gregarious, charming and always up for ale, who loves and protects humans? That, to me, sounds like a method actor, playing the part to get more tourism. As for the stories of their deeds, come now, take a look at them. We are to believe that 7 Space Marines defended a city from millions of Nurgle followers, from cultists through to demons, and even Terminator Marines from the Death Guard, and somehow didn't lose 1 Marine. Or that 50 Space Wolves boarded the most dreaded, bar 1, of Nurgle's giant space hulks, taking on millions of its inhabitants, including yet more Death Guard, got to the middle, blew it up, and then got out again. And then the Jarl Stormcaller tested his physical strength against a demon-infested Wraith Knight, and matched it? No, it's propaganda. Look at the First War for Armageddon. The Space Wolves, supposedly, saved the Guard and its inhabitants, fighting off the Inquisition, killing a Grandmaster of the Grey Knights, and making them back down from invading Fenris. With all the power that the Inquisition, Grey Knights, and others can bring to bear? Do me a favour. It was coordinated so those that were saved were untainted. They had already been screened. It gave the downtrodden of the Imperium hope that they had a Space Marine chapter on their side. And that's what the Imperium wants. Belief that an external force can save those it treads on, because it stops them from trying to do the saving themselves. And then there's the Burden of Prospero. You'd think that hard to explain away, but it's very simple. Suddenly, Thousand Sons Marines were changing at a huge pace, right in front of Magnus's eye. He thought he'd solved it. He thought he knew everything. And in that moment, he realised that he had, in fact, done everything wrong. And his ego couldn't take it. His mind broke, his sanity shattered, just like his soul. To protect his ego, in his madness, he imagined that it wasn't him that was at fault, but the Space Wolves he'd heard about. The Emperor's executioners were coming for him. And when you're the second most powerful Psyker humanity has ever seen, and you've thrown your lot in with the God of Psykers, and are completely lost to madness, then what you imagine can, at least, partly become true. There were space wolves now attacking. They weren't flesh and blood, but conjuration from Magnus's broken psyche. Prospero, essentially, burned itself. And what of the Marines and the like that swear blind they've served alongside the Vica Fenrica? Those that swear they have fought alongside the Space Wolves are mistaken. They have fought along the Grey Knights in disguise. The Grey Knights are a secret, but the Wolves can move freely. So what better cover is there? The Space Wolves are not real. They have never been real. You have been duped by the mighty twin forces of Malcador and the Fenrisian Tourist Board yet again. I must go now. The Inquisition are trying to find my location. To keep bringing you the truth, I have to keep moving. And you must subscribe, or you'll never know the real truth of the Warhammer 40k universe. Vox of Scoff, signing off, for now.